The Black Lives Matter Global Network Foundation is suing a progressive nonprofit group that they say has been withholding necessary funds. The lawsuit accuses the Tides Foundation, which has managed hundreds of millions of donations for progressive groups since it was founded in 1976, of fraud and withholding more than $33 million in donations. Black Lives Matter Global Network Foundation board members Shalomyah and Cicley join us right now. I'm glad to have both of you here. So, okay, let's jump right into this. So, first of all, for folks who don't understand, there are organizations that out there serve as what we call as fiscal agents for nonprofits. Is that the role that the Tides Foundation had for the Black Lives Global Network Foundation?
It's good to be with you, Roland, and that's exactly right. And, you know, for far too long, organizations like Tides have been insulated from the radical accountability that Black Lives Matter demands from institutions like the police and, you know, politicians. And so last week, we announced a landmark lawsuit against the Tides Foundation, which does operate as a fiscal sponsor and as a manager of donor-advised funds for rich folks. Your audience might be wondering, what is a fiscal sponsor? A fiscal sponsor is an organization that lends their tax-exempt status to a smaller organization or a project, organizations that in many instances are Black-led, doing movement work in exchange for a fee. But what people would be surprised to know is, although this model has been in place since about the 1950s or so, there's no legislation, there are no laws that actually regulate this industry. It doesn't exist. And so
what fee has Tides been charging the Black Lives Global Matter Network Foundation in order to handle transactions?
So it ranged from 3% to about 8 or 9% over the course of 2020 to about 2022.
Now, when you say it range, normally, look, I mean, I've sat on nonprofit boards, sit on one right now, where we actually serve as the fiscal agent. It's 50-can. We serve as the fiscal agent for some groups, and the fee is pretty much negotiated and locked in. So how did this fee fluctuate?
The Tides Foundation actually has a number based on the amount of assets. So up to a certain percentage or amount, that changes the amount of percentage that you hold.
Does it go up in terms of more money? So normally what happens is if you are bringing in more money, the percentage goes down.
That's exactly right. That's typically how it works with the Tides Foundation. And some of this, of course, is, legalese, and it's got to be admitted in discovery. And so we can't give all of the details, but that is exactly what happened in terms of our contract. The amount actually went down based on the amount of funds that were allocated in the Global Networks account. And I do want to say, Roland, this is really important to add, that it has been months since we asked for a detailed accounting of these finances at Tides. I've been on emails, many of them, for at least 6 months, where we've been saying how much is there. Not only are they taking the fees, I want to be clear that many of these fiscal sponsors are fiscal agents, and Tides is one of them, will also hold the money and gain interest on it. So they are holding your money. They are essentially providing a service for you because maybe you're a small nonprofit or a new nonprofit, but they're actually gaining interest on the money that they're holding on your behalf. And that is not included in any of the funds that we're able to eventually get our hands on or distribute.
So based upon whatever your arrangement is, what is the normal process? Do they disperse a set amount per month? Do you request a certain amount? Or is it a matter of whatever fund comes in the month of May, that money is sent to you in June? What's the process?
It's a great question, and it really does depend on the specific context. And the usual situation of a fiscal sponsor, they are essentially operating as a quasi-financial institution,
right,
which is what we allege, right? They are paying vendors, right? If you want to pay a vendor because they're doing work, for your project, you would let your fiscal sponsor know, and then they write a check, send those dollars from you that are earmarked for you, that have been raised by donor, raised by the project, specific for that project. And they would send those dollars to, for example, that vendor. So and they do that type of admin work. For the specific arrangement that we had with Tides, they were doing grant making on behalf of the organization, BLM GNF. And so we tell them where we'd want to send out grants. And then, the result of that was supposed to be that they'd send those grant dollars out to that organization. At some point in time, though, right, once you are on strong footing and ready to continue in your own independent way, which was the case for us, we now, have our own 501c3 status. We're able to be transparent and accountable on our own. We don't need Tides. Well, those dollars are supposed to be sent to the organization, right? Because they were raised literally from donors with the intention of them going to Black Lives Matter Global Network Foundation. In this instance, Tides has refused to turn over those dollars in the way that donors have intended. And we're talking about 33 million plus, but we actually really don't know because they have failed to give us something as simple as a statement to what Cicley mentioned earlier.
When was this set up and who set this up? So how long has this been this way?
So it was set up in 2020, and it was set up by the previous board, previous executive director. And it was done in the moment of a global uprising, right? And in that moment, the Black Lives Matter decided it made sense to ensure that there was a fund that was started at Tides, again, that would allow us to do the work of grant making while we did the paperwork to set up our 501c3 status.
So the previous board created this relationship. You said that was in 2020? That's
correct.
All right. So now we're in 2024. And you're saying that you've been on phone calls, you've been sending emails, and Tides will not give you an accounting of, one, how much money is there, two, when they're going to send what you're seeking that you have all of the assets that have been donated on your behalf transferred over to you.
That is correct. In fact, it wasn't until this lawsuit was filed, and I do want to say that we went through attempts at mediation. We asked for an extension on a statute of limitations. We were up against a timeline in order to conduct this lawsuit. So we tried lots of options to get them to move in their position, but it wasn't until this lawsuit went public that we found out that $12.5 or $6 million went to another organization that we didn't even know about. We didn't know about that amount.
I'm sorry. Hold on 1 second. So when you say $12.5 or $6 million went to the other organization, you're saying that Tide sent $12.5 million of money that was for the Black Lives Global Network Foundation sent to another group without your authorization?
That's right. We found that out in the news. We found out that it went to another Black Lives Matter organization.
What's the organization?
The group is Black Lives Matter Grassroots.
Okay, so the Black Lives Matter Grassroots, y'all have been in, that's Melina Abdullah, and y'all have been back and forth in contentious with them because they were a part of the global network, correct?
Yeah, I wouldn't say we're in contention because they're not a part of the network. They actually filed suit against us, and an LA County judge dismissed that suit and made it very clear that the suit was frivolous. And so to find that, funds had been sent to one organization, even after Tides themselves have said in the media recently that the intention was not that the money goes to one organization, was quite jarring for us, and ultimately a demonstration of how someone needs to be paying attention to how organizations like Tides and other fiscal sponsors are operating.
So the reason I asked that because, and this is where I think for the purpose of the public, folks have no idea who's what, who does what, who's involved in what. And I remember interviewing Patrisse Cullors, and then of course when she left, I've had Melina on as well with Black Lives Matter Grassroots. And so explain to us exactly what is the Black Lives Matter Global Network Foundation? What is it? Who runs it? And what do you do?
I came on this board in 2022 after working with and for nonprofits for 25 years as a newly formed board. There are 3 board members, and I do know that everything that I'm telling you now can be found on blacklivesmatter.com in our Transparency Center, right? So there are 3 board members who run the Black Lives Matter Global Network Foundation. We are a legitimate 501c3 organization who is on pace to be the largest philanthropic abolitionist organization to ever exist. In the last 2 years of being on this board, I serve as board chair, we have had our heads down. We have been working behind the scenes. We have been building infrastructure. We have been legitimizing ourselves and committing to accountability and transparency as it relates to all of the dollars that have been entrusted in us. And not only that, we have committed to give money through grant making, as a traditional foundation would, to Black-led frontline organizations. We've done that to the tune of over $35 million, some of those being Black Lives Matter chapters, but not only, other organizations that are doing the work of Black people around the world. And so we are the largest abolitionist philanthropic organization under the moniker Black Lives Matter. We are blacklivesmatter.com, and we are here to be accountable and transparent. We have a strategic plan, strategic pillars. We have focuses of emphasis, but we are an operating foundation that is working on behalf of Black people and doing right by the funding that was invested in us from the very beginning.
Okay, so Shalomyah, I'm looking. So go to my iPad, Anthony. So right now there are 3 board members.
That's right.
Shalomyah Bowers, Dejane Parker, Cicley Gay. That's a rather small board. Normally, boards, you might have 6 to 8. So, one, who's the chair of the board?
That's me. I am the board chairwoman.
Okay, so you're the board chair. Okay, how many board members do you plan to have?
Yeah, it's so great that you asked that question. We've actually had a team of advisors, attorneys, accountants, and nonprofit experts who have helped us build out a plan to grow our board. We want to be honest here. A lawsuit is a distraction, both financially and otherwise. And so for the last 2 years, we've attempted and invited 2 attorneys actually to serve on our board. And unfortunately, for a lot of reasons, they have declined. Some of those reasons include the scrutiny, the misinformation, the lawsuits that we've unfortunately had to encounter. So it's difficult to grow a board, Roland, when you're constantly in the news, when people are lying about you and saying that you're mismanaging funds. But it is absolutely our intention to not only invite 2 people to join the board, but even more qualified individuals to make up a comprehensive board and build this organization the way that it should be.
So previously, obviously, when Patrisse was over the organization, there was activism, there was a lot of different things, there were all kinds of different pieces. Okay, so right now, Shalomyah, what exactly do y'all do? What do y'all do?
Yeah, it's a good question. And so I'll just expand on what Cicley had mentioned, in terms of our pillars. So to see the full potential of Black Lives Matter, right, realized at scale, what we're trying to accomplish in the world, right, a world where Black people have what they need and want in order to thrive. We operate across 6 different pillars, one of them being frontline organizing, the other being research and education, the 3rd being culture, the 4th being policy, the 5th being arts, and the 6th being healing justice. And so everything that we do, be that granting money and actually doing the work, operate under those 6 pillars. And so we're not a traditional foundation in the sense that we only give out dollars. We're a hybrid organization where we give out dollars and we do the work in those 6 different pillars.
Okay, so and as relate to that, you don't have chapters, correct?
That's correct. In 2020, chapters and the foundation, right, the Global Network Foundation, folks who were in movement space came together, and there was a call-in. To be quite honest, a call-in about the lack of transparency, a call-in about the lack of accountability, and a call-in about the lack of chapters having the autonomy to be able to do the work that they needed to do on the ground. And so there was an agreement that there would be a separate container for the organizing that would happen on the ground, and that the Global Network Foundation would turn into a philanthropic organization while also helping to achieve the goals of, that all of the Black Lives Matter organizations, have been set out to do for the last decade plus.
So what is that? So what is that separate container? What is that?
So BLM Grassroots was supposed to be that, right? But as we know is the case in any movement work, things get messy. And there are disagreements, and that is okay, right? And so while BLM Grassroots was initially supposed to be that concept, well, what we've seen is...
I'm sorry, when you say the concept, meaning initially BLM Grassroots was supposed to be a part of the Black Lives Matter Global Network Foundation.
No. BLM Grassroots was supposed to be the container holding the chapter organizing and chapter.
Got it. So y'all were separating things, meaning BLM Grassroots was supposed to be the place where chapters were based, and now were they supposed to be a separate entity?
That's correct. They were to be a separate entity. What we saw though were chapters that did not want to organize under the banner of BLM Grassroots. And so they formed their other autonomous organizations. We saw things like BLM 10, et cetera. What I'm getting at is the wisdom that we had to ensure that organizations doing Black liberation work could be autonomous and could fundraise on their own and could, not be tethered to the Global Network Foundation. Well, that is essentially what led to the separation, and it has been something that's worked, right? I mean, aside from some of the drama that has made its way in court filings frivolously, it has largely worked. Again, $35 million plus have gone out the door in 3 years to these Black-led organizations, be that a Black Lives Matter chapter or just a organization that is doing the work in a different name, doing the work of abolition. It has worked, and we will continue to obviously ensure that Black liberation is funded at scale, and that is the genius, in my opinion, of what folks put together in 2020. Meaning, we can't realize the goals of Black Lives Matter without the finances to be able to do it. And we've never in abolition had a institution as well resourced as Black Lives Matter Global Network Foundation to be able to fuel that work and to fuel the work of activists and frontline organizers on the ground. And so
so let me just walk back a little bit for the people who are watching or listening who don't quite understand, because Black Lives Matter took off in the public space after the hashtag was created, after the George Zimmerman verdict. And then when Patrice, Alicia, and I'm leaving out one person. Okay, I said Opal. Then they tried to trademark Black Lives Matter name. But because it was already in the public space, they couldn't. So what the folks don't realize, and this is I think this is partly why there's a lot of confusion, because what people don't understand is there are a lot of entities out there right now that have Black Lives Matter in their name that are not actually associated with the foundation or with Black Lives Matter Grassroots. And so when people say, well, look at Black Lives Matter did, it's not necessarily the case, because it's like the NAACP, you can't create your own NAACP chapter unless you're part of the NAACP. But you can actually create a Black Lives Matter group that's not affiliated with any of y'all, correct?
Yes. Roland, if there is one thing we want people to walk away from this interview understanding, it is that. It has been one of the most complicated pieces of information that I've been working to clarify since I joined this board. So much so, in fact, that has been a foundation called the Black Lives Matter Foundation that was actually founded by a white person that ended up giving all the money to the police, right? It was raised millions of dollars. And so it is very difficult to ensure that our messaging and our position.
Folks, don't speed past that. So you're saying that was this the group out of San Francisco?
Yeah, out of California, yeah.
California, yeah.
So that was a group that was formed, and because I remember there were some corporations that gave, and then when they found out, they pulled their money. So you're saying there was, or does it still exist?
It still exists to my knowledge.
Yeah.
One second, Shalomyah, go ahead.
I was going to say, it still exists to my knowledge, and it's confusing. Thankfully, we've been able to work with folks to ensure that there's folks know the real Black Lives Matter, but it still exists.
So Cicley, you said millions was given to them. Do you know how much?
I've read up to 10 million, and that's in the news. I certainly didn't fact check it. I do know that before I joined the board, I did my own research to ensure that I was partnering with the organization that was aligned with my own mission and life's work and values, and that wasn't the one.
But you say that foundation gave the money to police?
They did.
Gotcha.
For own records.
Okay, so. So hopefully folks now, now understand, in terms of the all back and forth. So let me now go back. So the grant that you provide, meaning, so let's say there is a social justice group out there right now, and they want to apply for a grant. First of all, have you established that in terms of the grants that you give, are these 10,000, 20,000, 30,000, 50,000, or do you look at it case by case to determine what you fund?
I worked in philanthropy for 10 years, Roland. I come from the foundation world. I've only worked with nonprofits my entire life. And so I recognize as board chair that we've got to establish strategy around our grant making. We do not have one formula around the grants that we make. However, all of them have to ensure that they're aligned with our strategic values and our mission. We do have grantee applications, reports. We have check-ins with grantee organizations. Most of them have, however, been based on relationships that we've either pursued, identified, cultivated, and then brought into the fold to invite to receive dollars. A good example of that is Elaine Brown, the former chairwoman of the Black Panther Party, who just received $1 million grant for housing out in Oakland through her organization, Oakland and the World. Elaine Brown came to our attention because her work met every single one of our strategic pillars. It is not just community revitalization, it's workforce development, it's Black liberation. And we formed a partnership with her. And we want our grant making to not just be money in, money out. We want to really make a difference in the lives of Black people for the long term. And our grant making has to strategically reflect that.
And so, but I'm going to ask you, so if there's somebody out there, they have a group, and they choose to submit a grant application, can they do that? Where do they go?
We don't currently have our grant making open right now to the public. We may in the future re-release another RFP, a request for funding proposals. But given that our work has right now been about putting our heads down and building the infrastructure of this organization, it's been our priority to do that, to fight the lawsuits and accusations. And hopefully in the future, we can open up general RFPs again for nonprofits who want to partner with us.
Obviously, there was a lot of attention that came the organization's way when the announcement was made, how much money they had received. What was it, 90 million or 60 million? So the announcement came out. You've had audits and things along those lines. And obviously, you still trying to figure out how much do you have from tithes. So as an organization right now, how much do you have as an organization right now?
Oh, well, I can certainly say we are not able to. We haven't looked at our bank account statement as in right before this this show, Roland. But I can assure you, every year we file a what's called a tax form 990, where folks are able to literally see how much money we have, who we've given our dollars out to, and it was why we decided to become a independent 501c3 in the first place, which was because we knew that there would be a level of transparency and accountability that would not be possible if we were just under the Tides Foundation, which you're not able to really see, with all of the projects that exist, what dollars are going where and what dollars have come in for whom, right? And so our bold move to become a 501c3, I'm saying bold in the sense of abolitionist organizations, movement organizations that largely sit under fiscal sponsors, was a radical step in transparency, despite what folks reported as, right? We did that. We could have just decided to stay under, for example, Tides, and folks wouldn't even know that we had $90 million. That would not be a news story had we not become our own 501c3 organization. And so, folks can expect to see, all of the things that they're looking for in terms of that transparency in our upcoming 990 filing, for those that are interested. But I want us to focus on the piece that is really important here about Tides Foundation and our inability to continue doing the work that we've demonstrated of grant making, of getting dollars to the front lines, of Black-led organizations doing the work of liberation of Black people. We are not able to do that in the way that donors have requested, given the dollars they've given to us, because $33 million is being held at Tides Foundation under a concept, that isn't, where there's no regulation, right? And so, through this lawsuit that we filed, actually, let me just say one thing about the Tides Foundation. The Tides Foundation has amassed over $1.4 billion as an organization where all they do is move money around. That's all they do. They actually don't have any legitimate, work that they do separate from. We move money to different places. $1.4 billion they've amassed doing that. That is more than 740 banks that exist that have regulations tougher than the regulation, the tax rules that exist for Tides. The fact that an organization cannot get a statement, the fact that an organization can't get its money back, the fact that an organization has to even take the steps of filing a lawsuit, that all is a result of unscrupulous organizations like Tides moving dark money around and us having, not having the ability to have a check and balance in place. And so ultimately, we will be able to do more of the good work we've already done if Tides Foundation simply turns back over the dollars to the organization that donors intended it to go to.
So I'm looking at, this was a story from Bloomberg Law, and it says that resources this is from Tides, I believe. Resources in the Black Lives Matter Support Fund were never intended to be granted to large, well-funded national organizations like Black Lives Matter Global Network Foundation, and were always intended to be granted to local Black Lives Matter chapters. So here's where I'm trying to understand here, all right? Because it says here there was a 2020 oral contract. So are you telling me you do not have a written document that spells out the relationship between Tides and Black Lives Matter Global Network Foundation?
I would love to just point out the hypocrisy in that statement just for a second, because just in simple reading of that, the dollars were never intended to go to large organizations like Black Lives Matter Global Network Foundation, but $12 million went to one organization. Honestly, it doesn't even make sense because it is a lie. The Tides Foundation, we went to the Tides Foundation, and this fund was set up for the benefit of grantees that Black Lives Matter wanted to send, make grants to, and ultimately would be returned to us upon request when we were ready to, stand on our own two feet.
Right. No. So what I'm asking is do you have a signed document, or was this an oral contract?
Both. There's both a signed contract and there's an oral contract as well.
Because when I read this statement here, it gives me the impression that Tides is saying we get to decide what chapters get the money and how much.
And that's the issue with the fiscal sponsor model. The fiscal sponsor model, which is, again, created by an IRS rule, says that in order for a fiscal sponsor to exist, they have to have 100% authority to determine where the dollars go. So if you think about that, Roland, what that is basically saying is fiscal sponsors would have to advertise that in order to get projects under the organization, they'd have to advertise as follows: come to us and sign an agreement, and we control all your money. You have no say in it. You can't say it goes anywhere. We control your money, but please do sign up with us. Would you sign up? I mean, who would do that, right? It doesn't even make sense, and that's not actually how it works in real life. Although that might be the tax regulation, what actually happens is there are oral conversations that are between the fiscal sponsor and the organization, where they say things like, absolutely, we are going to make sure that your project is funded. We're going to make sure the grants that you want to go out the door. Absolutely, we're going to make sure that these people that you want to pay and bring on board to do the work, to support your work, are paid. And don't worry about it, but sign this document. So you actually end up having both a written agreement, which, by the way, the Tides written agreement, which we'll be able to produce, as this case moves forward, 2 pages. 2 pages covered $33 million. That's how you know something is not right. But what is matched with a written document are verbal agreements that are made that only create create the relationship, right, that help form the relationship between the project and the fiscal sponsor. And so that's why we're saying there are both, because that is how fiscal sponsors end up even being able to get projects to sit under them, is by giving them verbal assurances and making verbal promises as part of a verbal agreement, in addition to written documents.
About 2 or 3 more. Cicley, you want to say something?
Yeah, I was going to say many of them, Black and brown-led organizations that don't feel like they have a choice. If they're unable to receive grant funding in any other way, they don't have the capacity to have a lawyer, they don't have $90 million, what are they going to do but sign and do their best to be able to do their best work with what's been presented to them? There's a really good example of how this happened in Baltimore a couple of years ago after the death of Freddie Gray. A group called Strong Baltimore was doing the same thing as a fiscal sponsor. 150 Black and brown-led organizations had to rise up to try to get an account of their money and their money back. It happens more often than we would believe, but unfortunately, the organizations that are being exploited don't have the resources to fight back.
As it relates to again how your infrastructure, you're the 3 board members. You've had criticisms of board members are doing work and being reimbursed for the work for the foundation. Is that the case? Has that been separated? Are any of you 3 board members receiving any financial benefit from the foundation, or are you hiring outside groups to handle the work that needs to be done?
So I can say that as a board, none of us make money from being board members. That is correct. My firm has been widely reported. My firm, I do have a consulting firm, a progressive consulting firm that does social justice work, that was onboarded prior to me being a board member, and that we've essentially been the staffing company for Black Lives Matter Global Network Foundation.
That was before you became a board member.
That was before I even became a board member.
Okay.
Right. That's how I was introduced to this work, right, as a strategist behind the scenes doing the work of liberation, not as a board member.
So now that you're a board member, your company is no longer involved in any of that.
My company is still doing that same exact work, and we'll continue to do that until we're able to stand on our 2 feet in terms of creating a foundation, an organization that has its own employees, really, that are not subject to the attacks that have been folks who've been part of the organization have been subject to.
So I then have to ask this, Cicley, because frankly, and look, I've been on boards. I'm a 3-time board member of the National Association of Black Journalists. Other groups, Student First, 50 Can. And doesn't that, though, pose a conflict to have a board member but whose company is also doing work for the foundation that's receiving financial benefit because you're making decisions? So the reality is, if something happens with the company, something comes up, well, then you're one of the folks making the decision. So shouldn't that be separated? Shouldn't it be either you're a board member that receives no personal financial benefit, or simply be a consultant to the organization but not be a board member? Explain that.
Yeah, thanks for asking that question. As a new board member and then board chair, we had to pull the covers back and look and ask these very questions. We have a fiduciary responsibility, but we also have a responsibility to ensure that the organization doesn't completely implode. And so if we do have a firm who, with our own conflict of interest policy, with our voting policies, with lawyers who are checking to ensure that Shalomyah is not voting, for instance, on his own contract, if all of those things are true and this contract is in place that is standing up the organization, that is not, his contract is not profit. It is staffing. That is the full staff. Over a dozen people I interact with all of the time that are helping to stand up this organization. I had to assess risk as a board member, and I had to say, if this is gone, and if this role is gone, what will happen to our viability as an organization?
I totally understand that. But what I'm getting at is, I totally understand what you're saying, that you need to have staffing. But the problem is, it's a company of a board member. So if you talk about transparency, doesn't it make more sense to say, hey, we need these services that your company provides, and that means that you need to remain in a consultant role, not in a board member role, because board members are deciding on contracts. I'm trying to understand, how did you reconcile that? Because that leaves you open for criticism of self-dealing.
It does, which is why our books are tight. Everything that we're doing is regulated by attorneys. We've got people in place to ensure that there is no self-dealing by virtue of having conflict of interest policies. But I want to lean back into what Shalomyah said. It's that this is not a long-term solution. And I said we've got to stand up. Okay. This is what I'm trying to understand.
And Shalomyah, what you just said. If y'all met and said, you know what, look, we're putting this thing together. We need to keep this in place for the next 18 months. I will serve as a consultant for 18 months, but not a board member. The problem is, from an outsider looking in, you're deriving financial benefit while being a board member because it's still your company. And what I'm saying is, how does that not run afoul of your own conflict of interest?
Because I don't vote on my. So first off, I want to make sure that I say that I understand the perception. I understand what it looks like, and we will continue to do our best to make sure folks know that there is not anything nefarious or improper happening, despite what that perception might look like. And part of what's important this is a very common concept amongst nonprofits that Black, brown, white, You will see it in every instance where there are board members that are sitting on a board, where there is a company that they might be working for, partner of, own part of, what have you. And the organization does work with that firm, and it's a conflict of interest policy that is created to ensure that there are no rules that are violated, and to ensure that that board member is not part of any of the decision making related to the work of the organization with that firm. And so it's a very common concept. I think what you often see is Black organizations get scrutinized more heavily than white organizations for something that is very common, and that's what's
I'm not. First of all, I'm not talking about white people, and I'm talking about white organizations. I'm Black. The National Association of Black Journalists, our budget, it's not like we got even a $5 million budget. And the reality is, as a board member, I could not have a company that was doing business with the organization as a board member. I couldn't. I mean, that would just, that's so again, that's a part of, again, what critics have said in terms of how it's set up. Me personally, I just think, to be perfectly honest, I think it's a lot cleaner in terms of for the three of you to say, Shalomyah, I move to a consultant role. My company will perform these services. I will be a contractor for the foundation. And then once the decision is made by the board to say, hey, we can now hire staff, then they can move to a board position. But that's just sort of how I see that. Last question I do have here is the properties that were purchased, the $6 million in property. Do you still own those properties? Have you sold those properties? And if you still have them, how are they being used?
Well, I want to make one correction. It's property, despite what we see of all the claims that we've got out there about there being dozens. The organization has one property that was purchased, and it was purchased legitimately for work related to the creators. The creator's house is what it is known as. We call it campus, but it was created to ensure that Black creatives have a space to do their work, in addition to serving as a compound for meetings and organizational work that we have on our plate.
Gotcha. So it's in Studio City. Has 6 bedrooms, bathrooms, swimming pool, soundstage, office space. And so what you're saying, it's being used, it's functional.
It's functional.
Who gets who gets to use it?
We brought together, and Shalomyah, I'm sure was going here, families, over 100 families, impacted families who have been impacted by police violence, to recently have a healing moment and healing space through one of our grantee partners. And it was a beautiful experience of coming together of impacted families at the home itself. Okay,
so who gets to use it? That's what I'm saying. I mean, obviously, it's a compound. Is it in use 365 days a week? What type of creators? How do you manage that?
We do not have the programmatic infrastructure completely built out right now on a regular basis publicly for the Creators House. As I'd mentioned,
again, I'm curious. What kind of creators? When we say creators, what does that mean?
Yeah. We had a group of our HBCU ambassadors recently. We're really proud of our Student Solidarity Fund, where we granted money directly to HBCU students. We brought together our student ambassadors, where they came and they stormed and they gave us ideas. We filmed all of it. There is, like you said, a soundstage and studio in the back. We do have strategic partnerships that we're building out so that folks can use the space. And one of the examples is what we did with our HBCU partners.
So for example, we often come to LA, and again, I'm just talking about creators. This is what we do 7 days a week. Is that a place that we could come, stay for a week, set up, shoot stuff there, and what's that process? That's what I'm trying to, like, how does that work?
Yes, I can say 100% yes, Roland. If you wanted to, as long as the work is to do, to seek Black liberation, and that.
Well, shit, that's what the Black Star Network is. I mean, that ain't no if. That's what we do.
That's what I'm saying. If that's the work, and I'm saying that because there are some Black organizations that do good work, but they work in partnership with the police, for example.
Got it.
Right? So if you're not hitting all the principles of abolition, then most likely the answer to that will be no. But if you are, and there's alignment, then yes, reach out. We'd be happy to see if there's additional alignment so you could utilize that space. What we're getting at is the purchase of that property, right? It is for long-term visionary work.
Oh, I got it. I know it's purchased. Y'all still have it. How it's being used. So again, if creators out there want to, and again, people who are watching or listening also want to apply. If they want to do it, is there a form on your website where they can go to and say, hey, I would like to I'm a creator, I'd like to be able to use the facilities?
As of right now, we have artists in residence. So we just talked about that. Cicley just talked about that 150-person event we just did at that property.
Right.
That was done by our first artist in resident that utilized that property to be able to host it by our first artist in residence. Her name is Osai, to be able to have a place to think and create. And so it is invitation only at the moment, but if it works out and we can be in part.
Right, but see, so this is not badgering, but I'm trying to get you to understand from an outsider looking in.
Yeah.
If you're doing grants and I have an organization, but there's no process to apply for one right now. If I'm a creator, but there's no process for me to apply to use the facility to create. The problem is, if I'm an outsider, I don't know any of this, so therefore, if it's invite only and we're not doing grants right now, from the public standpoint, it then becomes, what are you doing? And so that's why I'm asking these questions, because literally I got people in our chat doing the same thing. Is it a rental property? Do you have somebody managing it? Is it the process, or is that a part of what you're all building together? That's because, again, trying to just get arms around what this thing is, because I'll be perfectly honest, from this whole thing was how it was set up from the beginning was greatly flawed, because it was so many different pieces, and y'all been trying to untangle all these pieces to bring some hierarchical order, and that's why I'm just simply asking that. So will you get to the point where, okay, yes, folks can apply to utilize the space, and there's a process to do so, but right now there isn't one. There's no place on the website. If somebody interested, they would just send an email, I guess, to your website, your address on the site, right?
We actually
public at the moment, if that's your question.
Say it again?
It is not open to the public, if that is your question. It is something that we utilize internally to achieve our work. And yes, we will make it clear in due time, what that looks like for folks that are interested in becoming an artist in residence, for example, to utilize that space.
Got it.
But of the issue with abolition is we've done a really good job talking about the systems that need to be abolished, torn down, and we've not done a good enough job dreaming and envisioning what society will look like once those institutions are removed.
But I'll say this here, and we've been trying to get y'all on for a long time. Y'all gotta communicate more and better, because we've been trying for a long time to get y'all on, because I know what white media is doing. I see it. Yeah. I saw what the attacks were on Patrice. I saw that was a wholesale, there's a flat out effort to completely destroy not only the organization, but the movement itself. I know how the right wing has been working, but what's also important is regular communication, especially those in Black-owned media, to explain these things to our people so their narrative doesn't gain a foothold. I think a huge part of the problem with Black Lives Matter, the foundation and grassroots and everything, is that the narrative has been cemented because of mainstream media, right-wing critics, and not being able to fully communicate to our people to be able to have them with ammunition to be able to fight back over the narrative that's already been established. Cicley, go ahead.
Roland, you're right. It's actually 2 years from the day that we first were on your show. We had a media roundtable. You broadcast that live back in May of 2022 when we first came together as a board. And you're right. People want information. So we've done our best at allowing that information to be in places where people could access it. But I have to be honest with you. We deserve grace as a new board. You can't come into a new organization with no infrastructure and expect to have every single program ready. You can't expect to have every single document in order. We've created hundreds of regulatory documents, responded to state inquiries in every state. The first thing we did, Roland, in 2022 was to file our taxes. So I'm asking people to give us grace to
Listen, Cicley, I've had to take over multiple Black news outlets that sucked, that lost money for 20 years, had to rebuild them from scratch. But at the same time, while that is being done, communicating to your core audience is critical because you already know what the right wing is doing. But when you got Black folks who saying BLM ain't shit, I ain't believing nothing they say, the $6 million house, all that sort of stuff like that, I'm just simply saying I understand when a narrative gets set, it is extremely hard to be able to establish a correct narrative. And so all I'm saying is a lot of this also was the lack of information. And again, it was nothing but New York Post article, Washington Examiner article, the Free Beacon, and all the right-wing folks. And I'm just simply saying 2 years to Black-owned media is not a good thing. So hopefully, now where y'all are now, you're going to have regular communication to be able to establish what you're actually doing so people have a full understanding. Final comment from Cicley, final comment from Shalomyah. Go ahead. Shalomyah, go ahead.
Thank you, Roland, for the opportunity to reintroduce ourselves. I want to just remind folks that we are absolutely here to usher in a new wave of accountability and transparency. I personally am a Black mama, a single mom of 3 Black boys. That is why I took this role. It wasn't for the accusations of mismanagement or theft. It was to commit to my people. And that is why I've done my job over the course of the last 2 years to build out the infrastructure and do right by the people who invested in us when they donated to this foundation in the first place. Roland, we are coming out publicly. It's why we are here talking to you as Black media, is because we love Black people. And I want people to be invited into the fold, to rejoin our work and our mission, and to believe in us, and to give us a chance to build out this foundation as everyone hoped we would when they marched in the streets with us back in 2020 and before that.
Shalomyah?
What I would just say is just keeping it back on what today is about, where we are announcing an unprecedented lawsuit against the Tide Foundation.
Well, no, trust me, I'll be reaching out to them to get some comment, but go ahead.
Yeah, and I pray you keep the pressure on them, because you'll get comment quicker than we will, most likely. What this action is about when we moved into the philanthropic space, right? We said we would only do so if we brought the spirit of disruption that we only know in terms of, what we do in the streets, in terms of a movement and a community. That is on display here by challenging what some people would call crazy, right? The $1 billion fund that, is the progressive fund that ensures that all of the Democratic aims and goals and politicians, get elected. We are challenging a lot of rich people, right? Folks who don't typically get challenged. And that is the disruption that we promised to do when we became a philanthropic organization in 2020. And that is what this is about. And I'm hopeful that we'll be able to ensure that new rules and regulations are announced, which is what we're seeking through this lawsuit, for organizations like Tides that have acted unscrupulously, and to ensure that Black nonprofits and projects don't get treated the same way we've been treated, where we are not able to get back $33 million that donors have donated directly for the work of Black Lives Matter Global Network Foundation.
All right, then. Well, we will be following and see where this lawsuit goes. We appreciate both of you joining us. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Roland.
Thanks for having me.
Fanbase is pioneering a new era of social media for the creator economy. This next generation social media app with over 600,000 users is raising $17 million, and now is your chance to invest. For details on how to invest, visit startengine.com/fanbase or scan the QR code. Another way we're giving you the freedom to be you without limits.